It is an important time, I think, as you were saying, Allison, is that, with the new white paper from DFID being released this week, also the G8 summit with President Obama speaking in Ghana on Friday, be the second time in Africa he'll be speaking and hopefully giving us a bit more insights into U.S. policy in Africa and development. And the German Mashall Fund, to give you a bit of background, is a American public policy grant-making institution dedicated to strengthening transatlantic relations. And a part of this research was initiated in trying to answer the question as to why some donors are performing better than others when it comes to aid effectiveness. And what are some of the challenges domestically in terms of agreement and among stakeholders, important stakeholders, around a consensus on a national development policy? And specifically, we felt that looking at this question through the prism of the relationship between legislatures and aid agencies and the impact that of legislatures on aid delivery was an important one, because without understanding that, we probably won't get to where we want to go in terms of aid effectiveness as far as principles, international consensus that's forming around the OECD Act principles. We looked around, we scanned the literature, and realized that there was very little actually on this question. So we felt like we were going to be adding value to the discussions around aid effectiveness and enlarging the debate around it to include the important role of this important domestic constituency in allowing aid agencies a certain degree of discretion to improve or pursue certain kinds of principles that we see forming out there. What can we learn from other donors who have sought to forge and sustain a national development policy? How does this occur? How does it impact aid delivery? So the objective of the report was essentially to deepen an understanding on how this relationship between legislatures and executives impacts the donor's ability to pursue its development objectives and internationally recognized best practices. Now, of course, there are a couple caveats here that we need to recognize, is that the U.S. presidential system and the U.K. parliamentary system are fundamentally different. We are different nations. We have different political identities. Obviously, the U.S. system consists of one of co-equal branches between the executive and the legislative branches, whereas in the U.K., the authority in the U.K. government is based on a majority in Parliament. So this obviously has a structural impact on the relationship between the executive and legislature that is unique. That said, we found that it's important to really get an understanding of how the United Kingdom has come to what seems to be one of the strongest national consensuses around development in the international community. And in the United States, we have a system where it's highly fragmented by contrast. And so we felt that this would be a valuable discussion to have in terms of learning from each other. In terms of the methodology, the report's analysis was based on a limited set of interviews among members of Parliament, congressional staffers, both authorizers and appropriators, members of DFID, former and current, USAID, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, various experts and NGOs on both sides of the Atlantic. It also consisted of a literature review of congressional and parliamentary materials, commission reports such as the HELP Commission, which was an important initiative on the U.S. side around the challenges the United States faces in terms of its development structures, and OECD peer reviews of the United States and the UK. Some of the key findings, and then I'll hand it off to Simon to offer a UK-specific perspective, were, I'm not going to go into all of them, they're all in the executive summary, but just a few to highlight for you were understanding that the extent to which a national development strategy is based on a clear legislative mandate that helps clarify and distinguish among foreign assistance objectives can reduce complexity in that national aid system. And in turn, this impacts the degree to which transparency and accountability that is expected by the legislature, and it also impacts the operational and coordination effectiveness pursued by the executive. A second finding that we came to conclude was this important concept of afforded discretion, which helps us better understand the extent to which legislatures allow executive agencies to pursue their objectives. It's a kind of a balancing act that legislators have to go through. They want oversight, they want political control of these agencies for taxpayer accountability reasons, but at the same time, an excessive control can, in fact, undermine these agencies' ability to pursue what their mission is. And we found that when looking at the United States and the United Kingdom, that when you saw cases where there's a low level of trust and agreement on aid policy objectives between the legislature and the executive, this can contribute to legislative rationale to limit afforded discretion. And this is in particular a case in the United States where we see a degree of distrust between these branches. And this may actually have an adverse effect on the ability of agencies and the executive to pursue the technical accuracy in their work, and in some cases can leave it vulnerable to legislative reactions to popular civil society concerns. This includes pressures for nationalistic and protectionist policies such as tide aid. On the other hand, where you do find cases where there are high levels of trust and high levels of agreement on aid policy objectives between these entities, this can contribute to rationale to allow that agency to have a degree of afforded discretion to pursue its mission. And in this case, the agency may benefit from managerial flexibility, and it may, in fact, be able to pursue aid modalities that are, in some cases, perceived as more risky, such as budget support. So you have these sort of two extremes, and they seem to be important in understanding the extent to which countries can pursue what we see as international aid effectiveness principles, such as host country partnerships, more predictable funding, donor coordination, and other forms of ODA leadership in the international system. A third and final key finding that I'd like to point out was we saw that the degree to which there was a concentration of authority for development policy and empowered development agency leadership also impacts the actual visibility and scrutiny that aid and development policy has. And this is a situation that influences an agency's, it also is a factor that impacts the development agency's ability to coordinate with other agencies, and having that kind of authority in the interagency process and interdevelopmental process. And this, in turn, may affect other agencies whose main mission may not necessarily be development, but their policies, whether it's migration or trade, actually impact development. So that empowerment, centralization of authority can impact the overall policy coherence around development at the national level. And the sum of these findings, plus a few others that are mentioned in the executive summary, led us to conclude that there needs to be a stronger effort to forge and maintain a national consensus around these strategic objectives for recognizing the while at the same time recognizing the importance of afforded discretion to accomplish these objectives. And the discussion should move past narrow specific and agency-specific interests around looking at simply the Paris Declaration indicators. And the discussion should be broadened to include important stakeholders such as legislatures. And in turn, where possible, extending this discussion to stakeholders in civil society in developing countries. And with that, I'd like to just hand it off to Simon to offer some perspectives.